Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. I want to say right off the top, thank you for everybody who has submitted so many questions. We have so many fun questions that we're going to be doing some mailbag episodes coming up in the near future and do some rapid fire stuff to somebody submitted, is cheerleading a sport? And I think cheerleading about that. Yeah. Sissy has thoughts. I think it's a sport. I don't even think it's a question, but
it's definitely a sport.
Anyway,
skill and training are involved. I mean, let's not answer it ahead of time.
That's true. That's true. We can't answer it now.
Yeah. Feels like we're starting the mailbag episode already.
Today we're going to talk about a subject that if I had to do like 3 words to describe Barry Jones, that I'm like, hey, I would take him in like a Jeopardy battle on something, it would be Sabbath. There was a part of me though that wanted me like, hey, we're going to talk about and kind of like prank you and say we're going to talk about Sabbath with like a guest. And just so you would just be like,
see how dejected he'd be that he couldn't do it.
How can I not talk about Sabbath? Why is Sabbath so important to you?
Yeah, there's no silver bullet in the spiritual life. Like there's no practice that you just, if you do this, your life will change and everything's good. But I feel a little bit like, at least for me, practicing Sabbath is the closest thing to that. Like, especially in my role as pastor, there's this sense in which I'm kind of feel like sometimes like I'm always on, like I'm always Pastor Barry, and like I need that time, that 24 hours of dedicated, protected time where I just get to turn it off, where I just get to shut down, where I don't have to be in that doctor control freak sort of mode, and can just really engage in rest and renewal. And that's what Sabbath is all about. It's really about rest and renewal. And so, it's just become an indispensable part of my own spiritual life and feeds in many ways other aspects of my spiritual life. Silence and solitude that get integrated into Sabbath, but then also get integrated into my overall kind of way of life. So it's a core spiritual practice that we see in the life of Jesus and the disciples, and it's become a core spiritual practice in my life.
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring how to do it, and we'll talk more about that. But for me, one of the things that's why Sabbath is important, why I intentionally am still trying to do it and figure it out and all of that, is it really helps me understand that I have to embrace my limits. And it puts me in my rightful place, and it puts God in his rightful place. And so for me, that's such a thing of having control and thinking I can do all these things and learning to rest in God. So that's to me, that's why I think Sabbath is so core to one of the practices that we really should embrace.
How would you really define it? Because I feel like at such a young age, I would hear like, the Sabbath day, and it's like,
what does it mean?
Yeah. So like, what is it?
Well, so biblically speaking, what you see is a 24-hour period of rest.
Does it have to be Sunday?
So no. So even as we think about what we find in the scriptures, it actually doesn't start as Sunday. That Sabbath in the Old Testament for the Old Covenant community was a commandment, right, for them to practice on Saturday. And actually the practice would be because the way in which Jewish people marked time was from sundown to sundown. So Sabbath would be from sundown Friday night to sundown on Saturday. And this was this 24-hour period that they were to cease from work, cease from productivity, and engage rest and renewal. This practice you see is actually rooted in the rhythm of creation, that on the 7th day of creation, God rests. And it's not because God is just exhausted after 6 days of really hard work and he just sort of barely makes it to the 7th day so he can, take a nap. Of course not. But it is this moment that you see in the creation story that has, I think, just beautiful kind of symbolism for the way of life that God calls us to, where God ceases from his activity and steps back and delights in the flourishing of his creation. And then he calls his people to practice that rhythm of life. 6 days labor, 1 day rest, delight in the flourishing of this world that I have made. And part of the point of the discipline is trust me. Trust me that I'm sovereign and that you are not. Trust me that I'm going to keep the world spinning, even if you're contributing nothing to it. And so you have to relinquish that sense of control and trust God enough to be able to rest. So this was rooted in the rhythm of creation. It is given to God's people coming out of bondage to slavery in Egypt, that they had been in this system of slavery where they're constantly working, and their whole sense of worth or value is rooted in Pharaoh's system of work and productivity, making bricks without straw. And now God invites them to rest. Slaves don't get an opportunity to rest, but God is trying to mark them as distinct, as different. And so this becomes a sign of the covenant relationship between God and his people in the Old Testament, that they're the people of the Sabbath. They're the people who set aside this day to rest. And one of the other things that I think is really important to recognize when it comes to Sabbath keeping is not only is it about creation, not only is it about ceasing from productivity, but also delight. There's a passage in Isaiah 58 where the Lord is speaking to his people, and he says, learn to keep Sabbath as a delight, and then you will know the joy of the Lord. And I think that's really interesting, because my background, whenever I heard anything about Sabbath day, was all about what you can't do, right? It was sort of like it sounded burdensome, oppressive. Don't do this, don't do that. All about the don'ts. When in reality, the desire and intention of God is actually about delight, right? What brings you delight? When you learn to keep Sabbath as delight, then you know the joy of the Lord. And of course, elsewhere in the Bible, we see the joy of the Lord is our strength, that we are strengthened as we engage in this practice of rest. So that's sort of Old Covenant. The people of Israel, Saturday was their day of Sabbath. You mentioned Sunday, and Sissy, I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit about the shift historically from Saturday for the Jewish Old Covenant community to Sunday, the people of resurrection, but even, thinking about, does it have to be a particular day? Right. We can get into that a little bit, but what do you think?
Yeah, so no, it doesn't have to be a particular day. I think we all take a different day depending on how that works in our schedule. So for me, my Sabbath is typically on Fridays, just because that's one of the days that I'm off. I like to do it on Friday also because most of my community, so my friends and family, aren't off on Friday, so I get part of that time to myself. And then part of my Sabbath is also engaging in community. So I get sort of both, but I like having the Sabbath on a Friday so that I can have that time alone with God and all of that. I think part of what you talked about, Barry, is it's this rhythm of humanity that we see God obviously practice in the work of creation, and then we see Jesus in the Gospels do that as well. And so it's actually ingrained into who we are. Pete Scazzaro talks about it in this way, where 4 countercultural practices, and I think you've summarized it in the same way, is just stopping, resting, delighting, and I think he calls it contemplate. I like to call it worship. But seizing from work, embracing my limits, surrender and control, giving that understanding that control is really up to God. And so seizing from work, then resting, doing activities that replenish me, that renew me, whether that's waking up, sleeping in a little bit, or taking a nap, or working out, whatever that is. And then, so stopping, resting, delighting. So what are those activities that give me joy and give me delight? What are those things that help me pay attention to the goodness of God in my life, and the people that God has put in my life? How can I slow down and pay attention to that? And that may look like playing, that may look like hobbies or sports, or whatever it is for you that brings you delight. And then worship, which obviously includes spending time with the Lord in scripture and prayer. Certainly that's worship, but even more broader than that, sometimes my most worshipful moments are actually when I'm out in nature. And that's where I feel, what are those things that you do where gratitude and love for God rise up in your heart? That's how we worship. So stopping, resting, delighting, and worshiping. So that's kind of how I think about Sabbath, practicing that.
It's really good. You know, I think that it's worth just underscoring for us as believers in Christ, as new covenant believers, right? The reason that we have, I think flexibility with regard to what day it is this was a sign for the old covenant community commanded to be kept on a particular day. There's a lot of Christians who go, well, you know, when Jesus comes along, Sabbath is done away with. And I think it's worth just noting that Jesus says Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Jesus is saying, this is for you. It's good for you. It's for your flourishing. It's never reiterated for us as a command in the New Testament. We don't ever get a commandment, this is required of you, in the same kind of way that you see it for the Old Covenant community. But it's still the principle of this is good for you, right? This is for your flourishing. And so you also get a statement that Paul makes about, you know, don't judge other by your Sabbath days and holy days. And there is this kind of, I think, flexibility that we can find to say, what's the day that makes the most sense? But it's still a practice that is good for us, that is for our flourishing. And so we can, I think, put away that conception of Sabbath as just all about what you can't do and actually really embrace the idea of this is a day that is for putting life back into you. What are those things that give you life, that bring you delight, that connect you with God, that connect you with other people, and really intentionally pursuing those things in that 24-hour period.
And I think when Jesus talks about that, though, Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, what he's facing in that time, there is a problem of legalism. So that's what he's addressing. Yeah. And yet that's not our problem with the Sabbath. Our problem with the Sabbath is the opposite. Of actually not practicing it, right? So it's very different for us today. And oftentimes I think we take Jesus' statement and say, well, we don't need to practice this. This is Old Testament. And I don't think that's what he was saying.
Do you think it's harder to Sabbath in 2023 than any point?
So it's certainly
different.
Uniquely hard.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, this is, I don't think, ever historically been something that's just easy to do. Right?
It's countercultural.
It actually requires you to be very deliberate and intentional. I think what happens in the way that we operate today is I think we've sort of convinced ourselves by the 24/7, everything's always on, right? It used to be there were ways in which the cultural environment actually helped make this more possible, and all of those are sort of out the window, right? Everything's open all the time, always on, always moving, and so we get wrapped up in that, and so it becomes all the more challenging for us to practice this discipline of just kind of shutting down, disengaging. But that's again where I think that we have to be really deliberate, really intentional, disciplined to engage this life-giving practice.
What does Sabbathing look like for you two? Can you use it as a verb?
Sabbathing. I think you just did.
I think you just did.
Yeah.
What does it look like practically for you two?
Yeah, so there's some things that I find that I always do on the Sabbath. So I typically I sleep in a little bit. So I'll get up a little slower.
1 p.m.
No, I can't do that anymore. I wish I could. I can't. It'll involve a really good cup of coffee, so I always make pour-over coffee. I don't do that the other 6 days because I'm always just running and I don't have time. So it kind of is a way for me to mark the Sabbath, that I'm going to take time to make this. It's going to be extra special for me. Extended time with the Lord. So it really, like I said, I use Friday as my Sabbath. And so it's an opportunity for me to almost look back on the week and to process through. I kind of do a weekly examine on Friday morning of, where did I feel the Spirit's presence? Where did I miss the Spirit's presence? What are fears and anxieties I got to bring to the Lord? What are things I want to be grateful for and notice throughout my week? And so I'll do a lot of that, spending time with the Lord, and extended time of scripture and prayer. For me, it almost always involves some kind of exercise, because for me, that actually is rejuvenating, both physically but especially mentally. So whether that means I'm going to run on the treadmill or I'm going to go for a bike ride, something like that typically happens. And then the other piece of it is So a lot of that is my time alone. And so by the evening, I'm ready to be with people. And it's going to be typically really good food, really good drink with really good friends. So people that are, so this is not ministry. This is not a counseling meeting. This is people that are life-giving to me. And it's just laughter and good conversation and over really good food.
Peeps.
The thing I've added this year that's what pizza?
Peeps.
Peeps? No. Oh.
Here we go
That's
again.
once a year, guys. I
Peeps
can't.
pizza would be a next.
No, you can't put peeps in pizza. That's too different. You can't. No, it's wrong. The thing I've added this year that I think has been I've really enjoyed on my Sabbath is being, and this makes it much more intentional, is more experiential things. So I've been doing a lot more like concerts and plays and musicals, and I schedule those like, let's go on Friday night because that's my Sabbath, and so that feels like something I'm really looking forward to on those days as well.
I think the key, I mean, I'll describe mine, but I think in terms of people thinking through for themselves, the key is to ask what gives you life,
Yes.
right? What puts life back into you physically, spiritually, relationally, emotionally?
Yeah.
What are those things that are going to help put life back into you? And so when you process through that, I mean, I love Steve Cuss even talks about creating a
Life-giving
life-giving
list,
list, right? Just make a list, like literally list all the things.
Which
that
is really
bring you
helpful.
joy and-
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And so he has an example of like, well, some of the things that are on his list is getting outside, walking his dog, holding hands with his wife. So if he can get outside, walk the dog, and hold hands with his wife,
those are
all in, he's checking off 3 things from the list, all in one little excursion. And so just thinking through what are those things that give me life.
Yeah.
So for me, and again, some more principle before specifics, but there's some things to disengage and then some things to engage.
Yeah.
So disengage from productivity. That's the whole idea of just ceasing work. So what are the things that you sort of make your living by, productivity-wise, that occupy your mind, your time, your energy? Stop doing those things. There are other kinds of things that may be actually life-giving for you, but that need to be disconnected from kind of what you do for a living. So disengage productivity, disengage technology. And I'm not quite as rigid on this in my practice as maybe I used to be.
We
where I
know
used to
by
really
your
try
screen
to-
time.
What's that?
We know by your screen
now,
time report.
Hey now, I'm reading on the
reading.
Sabbath on my screen. But I really try to stay, off the TV.
Yeah.
Because that's where I get into practices that are, maybe sort of mindless numbing, but not necessarily really restorative. And so, but just, I think, limiting your engagement with technology, disengage technology. And then third, I'd say disengage commerce, right? To some extent, just recognizing that this is an opportunity to rest. And so I'm not going to go out and, use my Sabbath to go out and, shopping. But it's actually like disengaging from that. Again, you see that principle, I think, biblically speaking, where you're not even to have other people work on your behalf on Sabbath. And then engage rest. So sleeping late, taking a nap, right? Engage delight. Again, for me, a lot of that is getting outside. I have a few places that I love to go on my Sabbath where I can just be outside, surrounded by beauty. And engage connection. There's opportunities is there a deeper connection to be made with God through some practice, some part of my Sabbath, and then connecting with other people, a shared meal together, a lingering, conversation that doesn't have to feel like it's rushed to get through. For me, silence is a big part of Sabbath for me, just shutting out some of the noise. I have a church that's not far from here that I go to where I can just sit in this beautiful, beautiful little chapel and spend extended time in silence. Getting outside is a big deal. Nature surrounded by beauty is really restorative for me. I'll spend a lot of time reading on Sabbath. I read a lot anyway, but that's a big part of my day on Sabbath is just spending time reading. Oftentimes I love to cook a slow simmering kind of meal. So I enjoy cooking. That's life-giving for me, and especially if it's something that simmering on the Sabbath is a kind of a fun thing for me. So yeah, those are some of the things that are important for my practice.
What if somebody's listening to this saying, "Hey, I love the idea. I've just never done this before." Whether it's their schedule, they've never really fully thought it through. What would be a good first step for somebody to kind of step toward a practice of Sabbathing?
I would say, first of all, have some grace for yourself, because
good.
It's countercultural. Yeah. It is going to be hard. There's going to be places where it even feels uncomfortable in some ways. So have grace for yourself, because it takes a lot of intentionality and preparation. So it's a matter of trial and error. I think I've been trying to practice Sabbath pretty intentionally, I would say, for the last 2.5 years, and I don't think I still have it completely right. And I'm still figuring out what works best and how do I actually prepare for it well. So have grace for yourself, and then start where you are. So if you have a specific day off, start with that day and see if you can mark that day as I'm gonna rest on this day. I'm gonna cease working and I'm gonna rest. And maybe if that's hard, then try 12 hours, right? What could you do? I've had friends who are like, 12 hours is still too hard. Well, try a meal. Can you do a meal? Start there, because I think once you start practicing Sabbath, I said this to you even this week when we were talking about, hey, how was your Sabbath? And I was like, I didn't even realize how much I needed it until I was halfway through it. Yep. So I think once you start practicing it, you'll want more of it, and that's where you start trying to carve out the time and figuring and planning ahead and setting your schedule in such a way that you guard and protect that time. So start small, and then just think about, I think the question I try to ask myself is, what am I going to do that's going to bring me joy, that's going to replenish me, that's going to help me connect with God and with others? And so what are some activities I can engage in? What can I plan for that's going to help me do that?
I think that's great. Yeah. I mean, when I used to talk with this, with my students at the seminary about this, oftentimes they felt in the middle of graduate school, many of them working, having families, it's impossible. 24 hours is impossible. And I would say, well, it's not, but I understand why it can feel that way. Like that. And so maybe for you, the best practice is to say, okay, if it feels like it can't be 24 hours right now, to make a shorter time, but just that shortened time, you're going to be very deliberate, very intentional. Oftentimes, beginning with a smaller chunk of time actually helps you to see, I can carve out more. And in some ways, that's the discipline of it, right? Yeah. It is to say, God, I'm trusting you that you're in control, that all this is going to be taken care of, that I can take this time. But maybe it's beginning with a shorter period of time and then working your way up to a full day. I love the evening to evening part of it is a great opportunity. So some of that is you're just sleeping through a large portion, and you're trying to really prioritize getting to bed early, sleeping in late. Yeah. So a few things I think that are also worth sort of offering a word of caution about, maybe for people who are beginning the practice. Beware of what Eugene Peterson calls the bastard Sabbath, the illegitimate Sabbath. And that is, he talks about that idea as the day off that really we wind up just filling with all the other things that we couldn't get done in the midst of our hectic week. And then the day off becomes every bit as hectic, just not on work-related stuff. And so part of even having a weekend and watching the way you're spending your time is, can you carve out time to get all the things done that you need to get done so that you really can protect that Sabbath and not allow other kinds of busyness to come into that. Beware the co-opted Sabbath. And by that I mean when Sabbath really just becomes all about me, right? That I can actually sometimes end up engaging Sabbath of like, okay, what are the things that bring me delight, that bring me life, but that I don't wind up with God having much to do with any of that, right? And so really being deliberate about this is, I'm engaging these things, I'm engaging these practices in order to connect with God. And so don't leave God out. Yeah. And so then the co-opted Sabbath, and then the last one would be what we might call the utilitarian Sabbath, which really is all about work. That is, I need this day of rest so that I'm better the other 5 days or the other 6 days for my work. And there is a sense in which
But that
that's
tends to
true,
happen, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I do need this practice for the sake of my work.
Sure.
And yet it can actually wind up once again being about something that it's not at the core supposed to be about, which is connection with God, which is
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
condition of my soul, and not just I'm caught up in I need to be better in my work, so I'm going to take. No, I need to be a better human. I need a deeper connection with God. I need life put back into me,
Yeah.
and that's what this day is all about.
I think the hardest part for me is it's not that I can't, it's that I don't want to. It's like, because if I feel like I don't accomplish something in a day, then I feel like I just wasted a day. And it's like, man, I just like took a nap and I didn't do this. I mean, even like non-work stuff, it's like, all right, let me mow the grass. Like I'm a big checklist person.
Yeah.
Let me get a little sticky note or a little notes app with the little bubbles that I can check off. And that's the struggle for me, is like, how does a Sabbath not feel like a wasted day?
Yeah.
But that's just kind of like the counterculture stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
all.
And
You are not what you do. Yeah.
There's a sense in which it's wasting time with God, right? And just being reminded that my value, my worth, my identity isn't found in checking off tasks and accomplishing things and being productive, but is found in my identity in Christ, is found in that relationship with God. So there is a sense in which I am wasting time.
Yeah.
I'm wasting time with God. Now I will find myself sometimes on my Sabbath going, I don't want to waste like I want to make sure that I'm doing the things that I need to do to make the Sabbath meaningful,
Yeah.
right? Rather than whether it's, watching TV or just some of those mindless things of like, I want to make sure that I don't miss all that this day has for me. And so it takes
Yeah.
that intentionality to say, these are the things that I'm going to make sure that I incorporate into my day that are putting life back into me, that are connecting me with God and with other people.
Yeah, I think I said this earlier, but for me, the Sabbath, like just getting to what you were talking about, Isaac, it's this embodied practice. Every week, I'm reminding myself that I'm not in control, that I'm not what I do, that there is a God and I am not Him, and everything's going to be fine, even if I'm not. Even when I'm not working, God's still in control.
Yeah, that's good.
So when it comes to like families, kids, littles, all of that, can you Sabbath as a family, and how have you seen it done?
Yeah. So I shared a little bit with our staff a while back, because this question comes up as I'm talking about my practice of Sabbath, especially some of the folks on our team that have little kids are going,
yeah.
what does this look like for us? How do we do this? And so just a few things that I mentioned to the team in that conversation. One is mark the time. So like you're helping your little people understand, like there's something different about this time. Again, when my kids were younger, we were doing this more together as a family. We would, on Friday evening, the Sabbath is coming. We're, picking up toys and kind of straightening things up so that we don't have to worry about any of that once the Sabbath gets here. But then we would actually start with the lighting of a candle and a prayer that we would pray at the beginning of that. And just that opportunity to kind of mark the time to help them know this is special. I have a friend who talked about, like, they have a special basket of toys, like that basket only comes down
out
on Saturday,
Yeah.
because this is kind of the way, one of the ways of marking time for them. Second, just make it special. Just looking for those things that you can do that are, you mentioned a great meal with, a great bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Like maybe for the adults, it's going to be the bottle of wine's a little nicer on Sabbath evening, but go buy ice cream
Yeah,
for dinner from Friday night, or you have some kind of special little element that really is a joyful, delightful kind of practice. Third, engage their senses. So again, lighting a candle, there's certain kind of smells that you're just trying to help them again engage the uniqueness of this time in sensory kinds of ways. Next would be get them outside. I think for all of us, Sabbath ought to be about connecting with God in His creation.
Yeah.
And that is something that's really just, I think, very, very life-giving. So looking for those opportunities to get kids outside. And the last one I put down is just take turns resting. Right? Sometimes part of the challenge is when you're engaging your kids in what's delightful for them, it's exhausting for you,
Yeah.
right? And so is there an opportunity to say, okay, you're going to take the kids for the next 2 hours and I'm going to have some quiet. I'm going to spend some time reading. I'm going to take a nap. And then when I'm done with that, it's your turn and you can go do what it is that allows you to just be quiet and still. And so just recognizing that you have opportunities to kind of trade off so that each of you has those opportunities to really engage in rest and restoration.
That's good.
Yeah, when I've talked to friends about this who have littles or families, one of the things that, especially for me, when I first started practicing Sabbath, and I think you talked about this a little earlier, Barry, where I thought about it as like, here's the things I can't do. So, no TV, no social media, whatever. And I think oftentimes we can talk to kids like that. And so it becomes, here's all the things you can't do today. And instead of talking about it as a list of don'ts, what if we talked about it as a list of do's? So this is the Sabbath, and look what we get to do as a family. And we get to, play a game together. We get to, I have friends who say, okay, you don't get individual screen time, but we're going to watch a movie together as a family. And so that's how we get around that. But it's being together and investing time, connecting with God and with one another as a family. And I think you've shared just for your family how that was impactful to your kids. And that's what I've heard from my friends as well. As hard as it is, because you're still going to have those Sabbaths where the kids are fighting, or maybe you and your spouse are fighting, or whatever is going on. All those things are going to happen. But how can you sort of try to move past that and get back to what are those things that are life-giving and bring you joy? So maybe it's making pizza together. So I have friends who every Saturday, their thing is they're going to make pizza together with the kids, or they're going to do a taco night, or whatever it is that your family likes to do together, or it's s'mores around the fire. I have a real good friend who's super health freak, doesn't feed her kids anything bad. And so, but on the Sabbath, they get to have ice cream sundaes, right?
Oh.
Huge deal for them. So they are they're asking her, when is Sabbath? How many more days? How many more days? Right? Because they're looking forward to that. So there's all sorts of ways that I think you could do that as a family.
Salad Saturdays.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about weekly Sabbaths. Sometimes there are extended Sabbaths that's beyond the weekly routine. And Barry, you have an extended Sabbath coming up.
Yes, so I will be going on sabbatical May, June, and July, and I'm really excited about this. One of the things that IBC has done for years is just the practice of every 7 years granting pastors a sabbatical, a 3-month period just to rest and be renewed. And, this is obviously connected to the practice of Sabbath keeping, but even for the people of Israel, we're told, every 7 years, let the ground lie fallow, let the ground rest. This is this idea of rest and renewal woven in the fabric of creation. And so many churches will have this kind of a pattern where they allow their pastors to take that time off, and I'm just really excited about it. I was actually supposed to have a year-long sabbatical from Dallas Seminary when I was on full-time faculty there, and then a 3-month sabbatical from IBC back in 2019. And instead of taking the 3-month sabbatical in the midst of the year-long sabbatical, I became the senior pastor. And so we had to figure out, where are we going to count my sabbatical clock from then? And so we decided to start counting from the time that I joined our senior leadership team, which was in 2016. So that put me at 7 years this year. And it just feels like a really good time for me to do this. I'm not limping across the finish line. I'm not desperate to get to sabbatical. I feel really healthy and strong, and yet that's, I think, the perfect time to do this, because it will help me not get to that place where I'm dying to have a sabbatical. I'm desperately in need of rest. And so I'm excited to get the chance to go away. And just, I heard John Mark Comer talk on a podcast about a time of sabbatical in his own life. And he said, I just needed the time just to be a Christian. And there was something about that so spoke to me, because I've been involved in ministry of one kind or another for a long, long time. And the opportunity just to be a Christian and to get away and to focus on deepening my discipleship to Jesus. I told our team, I don't want to come back a better leader. I want to come back a better disciple. And if I come back a better disciple, I'm convinced I will be a better leader. But I really want to spend this time deepening my discipleship to Jesus. I got a couple of trips planned that I'm especially excited about. In May, I'll be going to Christ in the Desert Monastery in New Mexico. It's one of the most beautiful places I've been, out in the desert mountains of New Mexico. And to be at this place, I've visited it for a day, but I've always wanted to go and spend more extended time. And so I'll spend basically a week with these Benedictine monks and enter into their rhythms of prayer and be in that place of beauty. And so I'm thrilled about that. Then in June, we're actually going to be doing a family trip. We're going to be going to northern Italy. And so I'm excited about that opportunity to really connect with my family, enjoy that, and make some memories with them. But on the front end of that, I'm going to actually go ahead of the family and be there for a spiritual pilgrimage to Assisi. I have been really influenced by the life and the teaching of St. Francis of Assisi, and so to go and to be in that place, which, again, I visited there, but only ever on day trips. And so the chance to just go and really be there, really engage that as a spiritual pilgrimage, I'm thrilled about that.
Are you gonna wear like a robe? Are you gonna look like Friar Tuck
I might
from,
have
Robin Hood?
I might have to wear the hair shirt,
like a robe, like a rope around your waist,
the brown robe and
the whole deal.
I may
There's
have
probably
to do
like
it.
fancy names for these things, but I'm just
The brown robe is what you're.
The brown robe and the rope.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
I really am. Yeah.
We're excited for you.
I know.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
I'm excited for you and love hearing about the trips and curious to see your pizza takes after.
It's different. It's different.
Well, hopefully we can hold down the fort while you're gone.
We'll do
I
our
know
best.
you can. I'll tell you, as is the case with Sabbath, relinquishing control.
Yeah.
And so even for me, I'm feeling in the lead up to leaving, like I have to let go of control into the hands of God and the hands of my very capable staff. But that's not easy for me. And so that's part of the point is it's not about me. It's part of the discipline for the pastor to let go of control. It's part of the discipline for the church to say, it's not about him, right? And to know the church is in good hands and God's got this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Barry has this Sunday coming up and then the next Sunday. Yep. So I'm sure if you have questions or anything, you could reach out to Barry before he heads out. If you're wondering about the podcast, we are recording, basically we're banking 6 episodes before Barry leaves for sabbatical. And so we're going to we're still going to continue weekly all through the 3 months that Barry's gone. But we'll drop those pretty much every other week of us 3. And then the weeks in between, it'll be Sissy, myself, and a guest joining us for some cool topics, some cool guests lined up. And
So you get Barry in the summer still.
Yeah, you still get summer Barry. And then Barry will come back and fill us in on all of the...
Yeah.
We can do like before and after looks of Barry right now, and then come August. But we're excited for you.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
All right, let's end the podcast with a little banter fun like we always do every week, and let's talk about pets. So, just the overall, I have some random questions about pets. I took my dog to the groomer this morning. I love my dog. I have a golden doodle named Honey, and Barb, my wife, kills me all the time because she's like, you care about nothing more in this world than Honey.
Than your dog?
Yes, and I will. She's my best friend. It's just, it doesn't matter what kind of day I have. Yeah. She's always going to be sitting there greeting me at the door. I love my dog. Mm-hmm. Pets in general, yay or nay?
I'm nay.
Oh my
Sissy.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Sissy.
So I didn't grow up with pets, so I think that's part of it. I just never had pets.
Okay.
So I'm just not a pet person.
Just nay.
Yeah.
Sissy. We'll pray for you, my sister. That God would soften your heart and
I'm a people
bring you
person.
joy.
So Barb, my wife, she didn't grow up with pets either.
Okay.
Was never allowed to have pets.
Yeah.
And then I was like, listen, we got to have a dog when we're married. And she's like, okay, but let me pick out the dog. Like if we're going to have a dog, I want a very specific kind. So she picked out this, F1B golden doodle, this whole thing. I'm like, all right, I want like a Great Dane, whatever.
Yeah.
And we get the dog. Now I'm just,
You're the one.
But she wasn't dog person. She was always like, hey, this dog will never even be in our room, let alone jump up on our bed. And now we're 5 years later, and our dog sleeps in our bed every night. So, and
Are you serious?
Oh yeah, and they're best friends. Like they
Barb.
are.
Okay.
Barb and Honey are just inseparable.
So we have a little dog, Finn, a rescue dog, and he's a lap dog. I think pretty much just a mutt, but we love him, and we refer to him as our emotional support dog. So that he definitely has that. You know, when you had a rough day, he's just going to climb up into your lap, and he's definitely beloved by the whole Jones crew. But he definitely has a special attachment to Kim. He knows the sound of the garage door going up when it's her car driving in, and he loses his mind because it's his mama's home.
What's a pet somebody could have that you would like instantly judge them?
I think people with parakeets oftentimes grow up.
Let's give the backstory. So I told them earlier when I asked what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about pets. I was like, well, I didn't really have pets. Okay, we actually did have pets, but we had 3 parakeets, which I'll get even weirder. So my siblings are Sophie, Sissy, Sean. We had 3 parakeets, and they were named after us.
Oh.
I think that's kind of weird, but in
That's
hindsight,
creepy.
yeah. But parakeets aren't really pets. I don't think. I hope someone doesn't
Your
have parakeets.
emotional support parakeets.
There's some like weird people
They're just-
like overhearing a conversation. Oh, Sissy's out of her cage. What?
It totally was. It totally was. Yeah.
That's
Okay, so
awesome.
no more parakeets.
So no, they like flew away or died. I can't remember what happened to them. We didn't take very good care of them, I think. And
If you want to find random pets, just go to DTS Housing, and you will find people with the most random, weird pets. I knew somebody who had a turtle in Swiss Tower in the married housing. We had somebody who had a parakeet. We actually babysat a parakeet, as weird as a sentence that is.
That is a weird sentence.
that
And
is.
I'm like, I will never have a bird.
What does that mean? Like you had to
Like,
just
hey, will
feed
you
it?
watch our bird? And we're going like out of town.
But it doesn't need that much.
No,
Like, you
but
gotta
it was weird because
give
then
it
it was like
birdseed.
flying around. It's like can I open my door?
Yeah.
And it's like sitting on the shower rod, and I'm like, this is weird. Only at DTS, I feel like
Yeah.
that this is happening. But
I had a friend in college who had a snake. That was her. She had a pet.
I was getting ready to
snake,
bring that up.
Like a
snake,
yeah.
No,
Which initially
all
was
out.
weird, but then I kind of got used to it. I didn't really mind it. I mean, she would study with the snake around her neck, like we'd be.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
could you be roommates with somebody who had a snake?
I was okay with it after that. Yeah, it wasn't a big deal.
I'm thinking.
Would that be weird?
I think I'd pass on the snake.
Yeah, no, you can find a new roommate if you want to get a snake. I'm all out. Fish? Are you about fish as pets?
Fish are okay.
Meh.
Yeah.
Little like beta fish. They live for like 2 weeks and then
Yeah, that's the thing.
yeah.
I feel like I'd be disappointed or sad when they die.
All right, there's your pet talk. Give Sissy,
Quality
Do not send
content.
emails.
yes, send all your emails to smatthew. It's 1T at irvingbible.org of why she is anti-pet. So
I'm not anti-pet. I just said I don't have any.
that means we'll get Sissy a pet before this is over. She'll have a hamster. Guys, we'll see you next week on Form.